A worried John was frantic as he waited by the phone. For some reason, the value of his company shares suddenly plunged by 300 points, before it came to a trading halt half an hour later. As a result of this, the company's net worth had instantly dropped by a few billion. Furthermore, he had also received a phone call from a stranger. The said person mentioned that the reason for his company losing money was because of his darling daughter, which was why John was currently on the phone with Jasmine. "Jas, did you offend anyone at school recently?" A surprised Jasmine paused for a moment before reacting indignantly. "What do you mean by that? How could I possibly have offended anyone?" All of a sudden, Elise's name came to mind, but shortly after that, Jasmine brushed it off and thought, "Elise's just a country bumpkin, so how could our fight have possibly alerted Dad?" She then subsequently disregarded Elise. "Dad, don't tell me that you've been listening to those nonsensical rumors out there? I've been following your advice at school, and been on good terms with all of my classmates. By the way, I'm having lunch with my classmates right now." "All right then. It's good to know that you've been behaving yourself. However, I'm warning you, you must treat your classmates nicely, and maintain good ties with everyone." "Sure, I know that." Jasmine was evidently quite annoyed at this point. But she didn't forget to remind, "My pocket money for this month is running low." When he heard that, John felt his head pounding, but he didn't reject her request. "Okay, I'll transfer you some money later on." "Thanks, Dad." After Jasmine hung up the phone, she turned to her sidekicks and suggested, "Let's skip this afternoon's class to go shopping." Meanwhile, Rita hesitated. "Perhaps we shouldn't?" Jasmine retorted. "It's not a big deal. I thought that you wanted a Chanel No. 5 EAUD toilet. How can I buy it for you, if you don't join us?" Rita then gritted her teeth in determination. "Okay then, let's go together." Upon hearing it, Jasmine smiled in response, and it was evident that she was in good spirits. However, she was completely unaware of the situation that befell Anders Group. John was rubbing his temples with a pained look. Meanwhile, his secretary gingerly reported the situation. "President Anders, the company's cash flow is at a critically low level and we're on the brink of bankruptcy. There are quite a few projects that we still need to finance. The bunch of people working on it has started to kick up a fuss." The moment he heard the report, John felt his blood pressure rising. "What did you just say? How could this have happened all of a sudden? Actually, this isn't a recent issue. We have faced a capital chain rupture before, but our regular customers have maintained a working relationship with us out of trust all along. However, as the company's stock has traded to a halt now, our business partners are afraid that we'll be unable to service our debts." As soon as John heard that, he was so angered that he threw all of the documents onto the ground. "Imbeciles. Go and discuss with the banks about the issue with our cash flow. Why are you still standing here?" The trembling secretary slowly backed out of the room. As for John, he was on the verge of losing his cool, yet he still remembered to tap on his phone and transfer a sum of about tens of thousands to Jasmine. As soon as she received the money in her bank account, she beamed widely and immediately went shopping with her sidekicks in tow. "Boss, don't you worry. In less than 3 days, the Anders family will be rendered bankrupt, and their business will no longer exist." Jamie was full of flattery. "Hey, do you feel less upset now?" Meanwhile, Elise grunted with an indifferent expression as her anger had subsided significantly. "Then, let's have lunch together. I've heard of this newly opened restaurant. It serves great food. It's all right. I want to complete some work. Why don't you head over to enjoy your lunch?" "That's not a good idea. Boss, food is our body's fuel, so it's not good to skip meals. Since it's my treat, you should take the opportunity to have a lavish meal." Elise couldn't resist smacking Jamie lightly on his forehead. "Okay then, I'll choose something spectacular for lunch." Then, she tidied her documents and placed everything carefully into her bag. When she was done, she followed him, and they walked out of the classroom. Soon after that, he drove out of the school grounds with her in his ostentatious-looking pink Lamborghini. Anders Group was a well-known corporation in the city, but its share prices continued to plummet until trading came to a halt in nearly 2 days. Moreover, a whistleblower came forward and revealed that the company was currently unable to service its debts. As a result, the relevant government departments came forward to take action by investigating the claims. This came as a huge blow to the Anders Group, which basically crippled them. Meanwhile, Elise was unconcerned about the outcome of the Anders Group. At this point in time, she had already managed to translate Better's entire document. "Better, this is what you were after." He was quite shocked at the speed she produced the work. "It's only been 2 days since you received this. Man, you're exceptionally gifted with languages." However, she explained, "I was worried that there would be issues if I dragged things any longer. So, I rushed to complete this before the deadline. Take a look, and make sure that everything's fine. However, I need to apologize to you. Due to personal reasons, there's been a third party who had access to the document. However, she's just a high school student, so I don't think that she knew what it was about. The thing is, that I can't guarantee everything will be perfectly fine. As a token of my apology, you can deduct half of my pay this time." Upon hearing Elise's words, Better couldn't help but smile. "Your current words seem to imply that I'm a stranger. I believe that with you around, the details of this document would definitely be kept confidential. We've known each other for so long that there's really no need to resort to all this." Meanwhile, Elise pursed her lips and promised, "You have my word that the details of this document will remain confidential. If there are any issues that arise from this, I will take full responsibility for it. I'm happy enough to take your word for it." Then, he took out his cell phone and dialed a number as he spoke. In less than 2 minutes, she received a notification that there was money being transferred into her bank account. Elise went to the bank after leaving Better's house and she instantly transferred part of her pay to a charity organization. After she'd done all that, she was just about to head home, when she noticed a familiar-looking car parked by the curb as she walked out of the bank. It was Alexander talking on the phone inside the car. She initially feigned that she didn't see him, and turned to leave. However, he yelled her name. "Hey, Elise Sinclair." A resigned Elise stopped in her tracks and she turned around. "It's such a coincidence to see you here too." At that moment, Alexander was in the midst of a conversation with his personal assistant on the phone with the loudspeaker option being activated. The personal assistant's voice rang out. "I'm sorry, President Griffith. I'm stuck on the motorway because there's been a multiple vehicle accident. So I reckon that the traffic will be quite congested for the time being. I'm not sure when I'll be able to arrive." Alexander paused for a moment to think before he responded instantaneously. "Forget about it then." He hung up the phone immediately after that. "Elise, come over here." He spoke with a demanding tone that Elise hated, but out of respect for him, she nevertheless approached and asked, "Do you need something? Get inside the car." His blunt words were quite perplexing to her. It then suddenly dawned upon her as she asked again, "Do you intend to give me a ride home? That's just nice. I guess I won't have to call for a cab." Upon saying it, Elise opened the door and entered the car. Meanwhile, Alexander didn't bother to provide any explanation. The driver instantly started the ignition and drove off. She had assumed that Alexander was about to send her home, but as soon as the vehicle started to move, he immediately threw a stack of documents at her. "These are the details of our negotiation with Mr. Sylvester later. Have a look." A confused Elise shifted her head to the side to look at him. "Why are you showing me this? My personal assistant can't make it on short notice, so I'll need your help." "Are you asking me to act as your personal assistant?" An uncertain Elise asked again. Alexander responded with a grunt and replied, "I'm sorry to bother you."
Like, follow, subscribe.
At that point, she couldn't think of any reason to reject him. Furthermore, she recalled the help he previously gave during the mathematics Olympiad and naturally agreed to him. Then, she started to flick through the documents in her hands to study them. Shortly after that, the car came to a halt in front of a 5-star hotel in town. She then followed behind him as they entered the place. While they were inside the elevator, she took a look at herself in the mirror and instinctively adjusted the black-rimmed spectacles on the bridge of her nose. However, soon after that, he turned around and scrutinized her appearance before he noted, "You should spend some time making yourself presentable next time. After all, good looks can be an advantage to females." Elise was about to rebuke Alexander, but she only stifled her words as the elevator doors had suddenly opened. Nonetheless, she glared at his back and muttered, "Well, if you think that I'm not presentable, then you should seek help from someone else. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and get over here." In response, she unwillingly headed toward him before the two of them entered a large private room. As soon as he entered the room, the other party instantly greeted him with enthusiasm. "Mr. Griffith, it's great to meet you." Meanwhile, Alexander made a slight gesture and lightly shook the person's hand. "Mr. Sylvester, thanks for waiting." Mr. Sylvester smiled. "I didn't wait for too long either, as I arrived not long ago." As he said that, he shifted his gaze toward Elise, but it was a brief glance before he shifted his gaze. Obviously, one could sense that he wasn't exceptionally pleased with how she looked. Nonetheless, she was quite indifferent to his reaction, and followed Alexander's footsteps, before she took a seat by his side. "Mr. Griffith, who's this lady here?" Mr. Ford from Eureka Corporation couldn't help but question. Alexander briefly introduced, "This is my personal assistant, Miss Sinclair." Elise tilted her head to greet them. "Mr. Sylvester, Mr. Ford, nice to meet you." "Oh. So, she's your personal assistant, but she looks underaged," Mr. Ford exclaimed jovially as he blatantly scrutinized her. Meanwhile, she felt quite uncomfortable with the way he looked at her. However, as she had naturally agreed to help Alexander, she didn't reveal a hint of displeasure but responded, "Mr. Ford, you must be kidding. I've already graduated from university." Although Elise was merely stating the truth, it was evident that everyone present, including Alexander, didn't believe her words. Despite that, none of them made it known. "Mr. Griffith, let's discuss the contract." Mr. Sylvester signaled for his secretary to hand the document that they had brought over. Everyone wore a solemn look as they started to talk about work. Elise performed her job quite well as Alexander's personal assistant, and she managed to handle all of the questions directed toward her by the other party. She was exceptionally capable at her job, and was even the epitome of a professional from the corporate world, which was a surprise to Alexander. Finally, their food was served at a time when they were almost done with their discussion. "Waiter, could you get me the wine that I have stored with you guys?" Mr. Sylvester asked generously, and turned to Alexander with a smile. "Mr. Griffith, let's confirm the contract's terms. I'll ask the legal team to draft the contract once I head back, and we can sign it after that." Alexander responded, "Sure. Thanks for all the hard work." "Mr. Sylvester replied humbly, "It's nothing. Thanks for giving me the chance, and I'll make sure we won't disappoint you. I hope we can work well together." As soon as he said that, he raised his glass of wine to propose a toast, and downed the contents. As for Elise, upon noticing that the contract was basically a sealed deal, she heaved a sigh of relief. She was also ravenous, so she focused on her meal and even enjoyed it. After a few rounds of toasts, it was only natural for everyone to consume some alcohol. Alexander then rose to his full height to head to the washroom. As soon as Mr. Ford from Eureka Corporation noticed Alexander's absence, he became much more emboldened, especially when he had consumed alcohol. He instantly stumbled over to Elise with a glass of wine in his hand. "Hey, Miss Sinclair, have a drink with me." Mr. Ford's breath reeked of stale alcohol, which caused her to frown uncomfortably. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ford. I don't normally drink alcohol." His expression darkened as Elise rejected his request. "Just do as you're told and drink this. Stop giving me all sorts of excuses. Do you know that I can get Mr. Griffith to fire you, just by asking him to do so?" Subsequently, Mr. Ford forcefully filled her glass with wine. Meanwhile, Mr. Sylvester, who was by the side, feigned ignorance. After all, to the likes of them, she was a mere personal assistant. Furthermore, she was rather ugly looking, so it was obvious that she should feel honored to be invited to drink with them. Besides, Alexander would definitely choose to turn a blind eye, for the sake of their collaboration. "I'm sorry, Mr. Ford. I really can't take alcohol," Elise politely rejected once again. However, the man merely smiled and stretched out with an arm to drape it around her shoulder. "Miss Sinclair, you really shouldn't test my patience." Elise's expression darkened as well, before she abruptly pushed his arm away. At that point, she was significantly displeased. "Mr. Ford, please have some self-respect." As soon as she said it, he was evidently quite upset. "You're just a lowly personal assistant. How dare you talk to me so insolently? You should be honored to have attracted my attention. Who do you think you are anyway?" Initially, she had her reservations, but as soon as she heard his words, her temper immediately rose. "I think you're the one who doesn't know your position. You're old enough to behave respectfully, yet your behavior is despicable. You're no different to a scum. How dare you insult me, you bitch?" Mr. Ford threw the wine bottle in his hand to the ground with such force that it landed with a resounding crash, which reverberated in the private room. As soon as Alexander heard the commotion, his face was as dark as charcoal when he strode toward the room. Moments after he pushed open the door, he noticed that Mr. Ford had grabbed hold of Elise by her wrist. "Bitch!" Mr. Ford even roared. "I can't believe that you have the nerve to show your temper." Meanwhile, Elise didn't expect the man to lay a hand on her, but she wasn't going to suffer in silence either. With a snort, she lifted her foot and kicked him on his crotch. As a result, here was a loud, painful moan that echoed in the room. Alexander then stepped forward and stood protectively in front of her. Then, he gave Mr. Ford a cold glare before asking, "What's going on?" Mr. Sylvester, who had remained silent all this while, hastily came forward and explained. "It's just a misunderstanding. Mr. Griffith, don't take offense. She's just a lowly personal assistant, so why don't you hand her over to us?" "Hand her over?" Alexander emphasized on those three words as his expression became thunderous. He stared at Mr. Ford, who was currently groaning in pain, before he lifted his foot and delivered a hard blow on Mr. Ford without any hesitation. As Alexander had exerted force when he kicked Mr. Ford was instantly flung into the air before he landed on the ground with a loud thud. Subsequently, there was a crack sound that was indicative of a broken rib cage. Soon after that, Alexander grabbed Elise and said, "I'm not that worthless to resort to taking advantage of a woman and surrendering my subordinate in exchange for a collaboration. From now on, the Griffith Group will cease all operations with you." Upon finishing his sentence, he grabbed hold of her and strode out of the room. A panicked Mr. Sylvester rushed after them. "Mr. Griffith, let's talk this through. There are some things that we shouldn't be hasty about. Give us another chance." However, Alexander disregarded the man's words and escorted Elise out of the room. While she followed closely behind him, she looked at his strapping figure and felt a warmth that radiated from his palm at the same time. At that point, she felt an inexplicable sense of security and her heart frantically racing in her rib cage. Alexander escorted Elise into the car, before he instructed the driver to immediately drive off. Meanwhile, she glanced at their closely intertwined fingers and instinctively tried to withdraw her hand. While the car slowly departed, neither of them said a word. There was a somber vibe that enveloped them, which continued until the car pulled into the driveway of the Griffith residence. She finally broke the silence and said, "Thanks for standing up for me earlier. Just let me know if you need my help for any company matters in the future." Elise thought, "If he loses this collaboration because of me, then I have to compensate him for his loss." However, it never crossed Alexander's mind to turn to a woman for help, so he rejected her outright. "You should go home," was what he replied instead. She was aware that he needed to maintain his pride, and it was also a male's basic dignity to resist, so she didn't say another word. Rather, she turned around to enter the house. Elise still didn't feel at ease with things after she entered the house, so she gave Jamie a call. "Hey, Jamie. If you notice that the Griffith Group is in need of some help, be sure to lend them a hand, but do it secretly, so that no one realizes that you are helping them." Upon hearing her words, a stunned Jamie gaped. "Boss, do you have a wrong impression of Alexander? He's well known to be a formidable opponent in the corporate world. How else do you think the Griffith Group was able to maintain its position as the leading company in town? He doesn't need any help from small flies like us. You should stop worrying, boss. It's just a minor contract that's nothing to Griffith Group. It won't result in any significant loss for them." She was finally rest assured when she heard his words. That's right. Alexander's such a formidable person, so obviously he wouldn't care too much about this minor contract. Nonetheless, she was determined not to allow Eureka Corporation to get away with this lightly. However, before she could even mention anything, he had already made his move. He messed with the wrong person. He's going to pay for that, Jamie said as his fingers whizzed furiously on the keyboard. Shortly after that, he came up with a list containing the details of all the Eureka Corporation's business partners, and thereafter sent the information to the company's opponents. How dare they mess with Elise? I'm definitely going to make their life a living hell. Miss Sinclair, it's time to wake up. I've prepared breakfast for you. The servant woke Elise up at the exact time. Meanwhile, she stretched while her eyes remained half opened. Okay, sure. I'll come downstairs in a short while. Despite her words, she curled into another comfortable position, and fell into a deep sleep once again. She was wide awake most of the night as she couldn't seem to shake off Mr. Ford's sleazy expression from her mind. After tossing and turning for hours, she finally managed to sleep for the rest of the night, but it didn't last long as she had to wake up earlier for school. Elise shuffled around, and took her time to get out of bed. After she freshened up, and applied some light makeup, she wore her custom-made wig, and made her way downstairs. At that moment, she noticed that Matthew was already seated at the dining table as he slowly savored his breakfast. "Good morning." She greeted him, and received a grunt in reply. Then, he responded, "Good morning." After that, she took a seat at the dining table and asked, "Are you the one sending me to school today?" "Yup." Matthew placed his cutleries aside while he spoke, and lifted his wrist to check the time. "You have 5 more minutes. I'll wait for you by the door." Then, he rose to his full height, and headed toward the door after saying that. Meanwhile, Elise hastily took a few large bites of her toast and grabbed a bottle of milk, before she scrambled after him. While he waited in the car, and held an iPad in his hand, he dealt with some work-related matters. He was someone with a different personality to Danny, who always behaved in a rather impulsive manner as an immature second-generation wealthy kid. On the other hand, Matthew was calm and steady in all his endeavors, while being a generally quiet person who didn't have much to say. Each time he sent her to school, he would only converse with her whenever necessary, and he basically didn't interact much with her. The moment Elise arrived at school, and entered the classroom, she ran into Danny holding a basketball and about to walk out. Their gazes met, and although he was unwilling to do so, he dutifully greeted. "Good morning, boss." The boys standing behind him watched their exchange in shock. Meanwhile, she maintained her composure and replied, "Good morning." One of the boys behind Danny came forward, and whispered to Danny, "Danny, is there something wrong? Why did you just address that ugly wretch as boss?" In response, Danny threw the basketball in his hands toward the boy. "Who are you calling ugly? That's my boss there. From now on, keep this in mind, you're not allowed to bully her, and if anyone contradicts this, that means you're intentionally provoking me." All of the boys stared at him dumbfoundedly, but none of them said a single word. After all, anyone who dared to cross Danny's path was basically digging their own grave. "Don't worry, Danny. You just have to say the word and we'll definitely keep it in mind. We won't act rashly." It was only at that moment, when Danny's expression softened slightly. Although he was quite reluctant to acknowledge Elise as his boss, he had lost the bet, so a true man would definitely honor his part of the deal. Since he had already agreed that she was his boss, then it was non-negotiable. "Let's go. Let's shoot some hoops." The group then headed off toward the basketball court and ignored the chime of a bell that signaled the start of classes. Meanwhile, Elise walked into the classroom and sat at her spot. Soon after that, she opened her textbook to do some revision. At this moment, Michaela inched closer and handed some snacks to Elise that she'd brought from home. "Here you go, Elise. This is for you. These are my favorite crackers." Elise took the snack from Michaela while replying, "Thanks." Subsequently, Michaela conveniently took a seat by Elise's side and glanced at their surroundings. Michaela then whispered, "I heard from my family members that Jasmine's family business is in trouble because their company's about to be bankrupt." She had been upset with Jasmine ever since Jasmine took the liberty to ransack Elise's bag without first obtaining permission. Generally, Michaela was rather forgiving of Jasmine's rudeness and arrogance, but Jasmine had gone overboard with her actions. "Well, I sure do hope that her family goes into bankruptcy. By then, she wouldn't have the nerve to be arrogant at school." Elise's expression was unfazed as she listened to Michaela's words before responding, "I hope your wish comes true. Fingers crossed." While those two chatted with each other, Jasmine suddenly walked through the door. However, contrary to her normal behavior, she currently looked defeated and completely listless. She glanced at Elise and couldn't help recalling her father's words. "Jas, did you offend someone at school? Is that why the person has been intently targeting us?" Although Jasmine returned to her senses soon after that, there was a flash of uncertainty across her face. "I don't think I've offended anyone at school, though. Perhaps it was Elise? Then again, she's just a country bumpkin. How could she possibly have achieved all this?" Jasmine suddenly shifted her gaze because she didn't think that Elise could be involved in the unfortunate events that had befallen her family. She placed her bag down and took a seat at her desk. The first lesson for the day was Chinese, wherein the teacher briefly talked about Chinese week before starting class. "Our school has started to accept registrations for Chinese week. I hope that everyone can support this event by participating in it. This is especially so for Jasmine and Elise, since you two have a strong command of the language. I reckon that you can give it a shot by signing up for it." After being suddenly prompted by the teacher, Jasmine took a deep breath before her lips curved upward to form a smile. Subsequently, she stood up. "Miss, I'll enroll for the program and bring glory to our class." The Chinese teacher nodded with approval. "That sounds great." Jasmine's enthusiasm should be noted, and something that everyone should learn from as well. Soon after that, the teacher glanced toward Elise, whose head was lowered, and asked, "How about you, Elise? Would you like to enroll?" Elise gradually lifted her head and met her teacher's gaze. She had intended to reject the request, but as soon as she noted Jasmine's enthusiasm, Elise changed her mind. After all, life was quite boring, and it would be wonderful to annoy a certain someone. So she responded, "Sure, I would be more than happy to enroll." Upon hearing Elise's reply, the Chinese teacher beamed widely. "Awesome. I wish you guys luck, and hopefully, you'll be able to attain great results in the competition. I also have some materials at home that will help to improve your listening skills. I'll compile it and give it to you soon. Once you've come up with your speech, I can proofread it for you." It was quite evident that the teacher had treated Elise like her own daughter. Jasmine was initially grinning from ear to ear, but she became downcast and sat in her seat. She glanced at Elise with tightly clenched fists while vowing, "I'm definitely going to win this competition. No one else can stand in my way." Once their class had ended, Jasmine's sidekicks approached her. "Jasmine, you're so talented to have been selected for the competition. I'm so envious of you." "Yeah, Jasmine. You're the best in this subject in our class. I'm sure that you'll be able to shine and achieve a great result in the competition." Jasmine enjoyed all the flattery from the others, but she feigned humility. "You guys need to stop saying that. I have an advantage because I've been learning the language from an earlier age. Besides, I'm not the only one from our class to be competing." "Gosh, Jasmine. You're way too humble. All of us here know that you have a strong command of Chinese in terms of speech. As for the other person, well, it's unfortunate that she's only there to fill the space. Regardless of what happens, it'll be your treat once you win the competition. An elated Jasmine immediately agreed. Sure. That's not going to be an issue. Well, since everyone's here, how about I'll treat you guys today then? Let's head out for lunch, and you guys can decide on the location. Jasmine, you're awesome. Her sidekicks continued to flatter her, which made her forget about her current predicament. As soon as it was lunchtime, she brought all of them to a luxurious restaurant outside their school. In total, the 5 of them had spent $3,000 on their meal, and she picked up the tab by handing over her credit card to the waiter. However, the waiter immediately informed her, "I'm sorry, but this card has insufficient balance on it." Jasmine's expression then stiffened as she quickly took her card back. "I gave you the wrong card. Give this one a try." Despite the change of cards, the outcome was still the same. "I'm sorry, miss, but this card has the same issue too." Her sidekicks then exchanged looks with each other, but everyone maintained their silence. Meanwhile, she felt slightly awkward, and tried to explain. "Perhaps my daddy forgot to pay my bill. Please hold on." As soon as Jasmine said that, she headed for the washroom where she immediately dialed John's number. Their family was currently facing a crisis wherein their company had also gone into bankruptcy. There were massive debts that were due to be cleared, and as a result from all the stress, he had significantly aged. He took steps to remortgage all of the family's properties, which finally allowed him to pay off the debts. After he cleared their debts, there was not much cash left on hand, so he was quite fretful about it. Coincidentally, he received a phone call from his daughter at that moment. "Daddy, there's insufficient balance on my card. Could you transfer me some more money?" John frowned and sternly questioned her. "I just transferred $50,000 to you last week. Have you already spent all of that money?" Then, Jasmine wore a guilty expression as she explained. "I bought some cosmetics and a bag. The money's all gone. Daddy, could you hurry up and transfer me some money? I'm at a restaurant and I don't have money to pay for the meal. Didn't I tell you that we are currently facing a crisis? You can't keep spending your money unnecessarily. I told you to have your meals at the school cafeteria for the time being. Have you forgotten what I said?" "No, Daddy. This is a once-off thing. I promise I'll have my meals at the school cafeteria from now on." John had always doted on Jasmine since she was a child, and he had never rejected any of her requests. Although they were impoverished now, he didn't want his daughter to suffer, so he thought, "It's quite fortunate that I still have 1,000 left. That should last her for quite a while. I have 1,000 on my card, so I'll transfer that to you in a while." As soon as she heard that he was only going to transfer 1,000, she knew that it was insufficient and quickly responded, "Daddy, that's not enough." That was enough to make John lose his temper. After all, 1,000 was all of the cash he had right now, and it should be enough for a meal. "Where did you go for lunch? How can that be insufficient?" "Daddy, I treated some of my classmates to lunch at a restaurant. Could you please hurry up and transfer me some money? I need 3,000 to pay for lunch. You should transfer me more, because we have plans to go for karaoke later." His blood pressure immediately spiked. "I don't even know whether I have enough for my next meal, but this wretched kid is still out there spending unnecessarily." He was so angered that his breath quickened as the veins on his temple pulsated. Then, he roared over the phone. "Jasmine Anders, I don't have that amount of money. You should find a way to deal with it yourself. Don't call me anymore." Upon saying those words, John instantly hung up the phone on Jasmine. By that stage, she was stunned into silence. Without her father's money, she wouldn't be able to foot the bill. Then, she rummaged through her bag, and only found a few hundred in cash, but that was hardly enough. She hesitated for a long time before finally exiting the washroom. As she faced her sidekicks, she finally spoke through gritted teeth. "I don't have enough money on me. We should pay for our own meal." As soon as everyone heard what she said, they kicked up a fuss. Rita was the first to respond. "What are you on about, Jasmine? Didn't you say that it was your treat today? Yeah. You said that this was your treat. How can you suddenly change your mind and ask us to pay ourselves? Jasmine didn't have a choice either, because she didn't have the money on hand. I'll treat you guys another day. Why don't we just pay for our own meal today? However, her sidekicks exchanged looks with each other where they silently agreed on something. I'm sorry, Jasmine. I don't have that much money on me. Me too. I only have $50 on me. It's not enough. Jasmine, why don't you give your family members a call and ask them to send some money? It was at that moment when Jasmine stared at her so-called friends incredulously. She was usually generous with them and even gifted them bags worth tens of thousands without any hesitation. However, none of them was willing to take one for the team and pay for today's meal. She was just about to say something when all of her sidekicks stood up in unison. It was as if they had reached a consensus beforehand. We still need to return to class, Jasmine. We have to leave now. As we don't have enough money on us, would you mind footing the bill first? After saying that, everyone left. Jasmine tried to run after her sidekicks, but the waiter stopped her in her tracks. Excuse me, can you please settle the bill first? Jasmine was close to tears. She finally fished out all of the cash in her bag, which only amounted to a few $100. In the end, she had no choice but to hand her designer bag over as payment for the meal. However, she noticed that everyone in class seemed to look at her strangely as soon as she returned to the classroom. Even her usual sidekicks had ignored her too. Although she wasn't used to such differential treatment, she tried to maintain a calm front as she went to her desk.
Like, follow, subscribe.
After class, Elise and Michaela laughed and chatted as they exited the school doors. I hate parting ways with you, Elise. Wouldn't it be nice if we lived together? We could eat together, do our homework together, and sleep at the same time. As she stroked Michaela's head, Elise comforted. Why don't I visit your place when I have the time? In an instant, Michaela's eyes brightened. Good. That sounds awesome. When the time comes, I'll have my mom prepare some dishes that you like. When are you coming to visit, though? After a moment of thought, Elise replied. In a few days' time. I'll come over after the Chinese week competition. All right. It's set, then. It was only then did Michaela happily bid Elise adieu. After waving goodbye to her, Elise headed toward a familiar car waiting nearby and opened the door. Upon doing so, she greeted Matthew, who grunted in reply. After she entered the car, he took the initiative to inform her. Grandpa is having dinner tonight and wants me to bring you along. All right. We'll go together then. Although Elise had no idea what kind of dinner it was, it had to be an important event, if Jonah was the host. They then arrived at a private room of a restaurant. Once they passed through the doors, they saw the other young masters of the Griffith family had already arrived, including Brendan, who rarely showed his face. When Jonah saw Elise, he waved her over. Come on over, Ellie. She obediently walked up to him and respectfully greeted. Hi, Grandpa. Then, with a smile, he introduced her to the person next to him. This is Ellie, my granddaughter. She's also known as my future granddaughter-in-law. The simple introduction was enough to cause everyone's expression to change. Even Elise was startled, but she didn't protest whatsoever. Meanwhile, out of all the Griffith brothers, the one who had the biggest change of expression was Danny. He incredulously looked at his siblings, as if he questioned. Does the introduction mean Elise has decided on a marriage partner? Elise courteously greeted the stranger. It's nice to meet you. I'm Elise Sinclair. The stranger nodded and introduced himself. Nice to meet you, Miss Sinclair. I'm Mr. Griffith's personal lawyer, Luis Sosa. Seeing that everyone was present, Jonah then declared without further delay. I asked everyone here today, because I wanted to announce something. Since they rarely saw him being so serious and earnest, the brothers suddenly felt uncertain, and felt just as mystified as Elise was. I thought long and hard before arriving at this decision, and now, it's time to tell all of you about it. After saying that, Jonah asked Louise to produce a document from a folder. Following it, he looked at Elise and continued. After thinking about it, I've decided that since you're now my granddaughter as well as my future granddaughter-in-law, the future of the Griffith family will eventually be in your hands. Thus, I've taken the initiative to transfer the 30% of shares under my name to you. No matter which of my grandsons you marry, this will be my wedding gift to you. All of the brothers were shocked the moment they heard Jonah's words and stared at him with incredulity with the exception of Alexander. Jack was the first one to stand up and protest. Surely this is too rash of you, Grandpa. Even if we leave aside the discussion on whether Elise can marry into the Griffith family, it's great for the family for you to bequeath 30% of the shares to an outsider just like that. He's right, Grandpa. Maybe you should reconsider your decision, Danny added. While he might have now recognized Elise's position, and was even protective of her, 30% of the Griffith family shares was no joke. I think it's very rash as well, Grandpa. Why are you in a hurry to do it? Brendan glanced at Elise before he continued. Not to mention, if we look at things from Miss Sinclair's perspective, she's still young, and might not be able to protect such large assets. Nonetheless, there was no change to Jonah's expression as he listened to their reasoning, and he simply looked at her before earnestly answering. Your concerns are the ones I've considered as well, but I've made up my mind, and will not change it. As long as you have no objection, Ellie, you simply need to sign your name on this document. A conflicted Elise pursed her lips. In truth, 30% of the Griffith family shares wasn't a small number, and it would pose a great temptation to the average person. To her, however, it was nothing but a number. More importantly, she never thought about staying within the Griffith family. So, she opened her mouth to reject the offer. This gift is extremely precious, Grandpa, and I can't accept it. I think you should take your offer back. Ellie, I know you're a sensible child, but I've already decided that you're my granddaughter from now on, no matter what. If you do become my granddaughter-in-law one day, this will be the Griffith family's wedding gift to you. If you find your own happiness elsewhere, this will instead be my dowry for you. Grandpa, Elise choked on her reply. As she tried her best to keep her emotions under control, she dived into his arms. Jonah patted her back gently and comforted. There. No need for such displays, huh? Just do as I say. But, why so many misgivings, my child? Don't worry about it. Then, he turned to Louise. Please have Ellie sign the document. Accordingly, Louise handed the document and a pen to Elise, where under the audience's watchful eyes, she took the pen and carefully wrote her name on the document. It's settled, then. Thank you, Mr. Sosa. As he kept the document away, he answered. No worries, I am merely doing my job. All right, now that we have concluded the official matters, we should get to dinner without any further delay. Jonah bade everyone to dig in. Yet, apart from Alexander, none of the brothers had any appetite. Jack left midway through dinner as he had to rush on the completion of his work. Not long after that, Brendan had also excused himself, and made an early departure. And just like that, Denny, Matthew, and Alexander were the only brothers left. Before Jonah left, he instructed. I still have some business to discuss with Mr. Sosa. The three of you should take Ellie home. Upon Jonah's departure, Danny pursed his lips before explaining. I'm meeting up with a friend, and won't be coming home tonight, boss. Let Alexander see you home. With that, Danny made a move to leave, and left Matthew and Alexander behind. As per their custom, Alexander would be the one to send Elise home, but Matthew spoke up this time and said, I'll take you back then. As a result of that, she waved goodbye to Alexander. We'll make a move now, then. Alexander grunted in reply, and watched as she entered Matthew's car with something buried deep in his gaze. It wasn't until the car disappeared from his sight that he looked away. Now that she was in the car, she leaned in her seat, and watched the night view from her window, while seemingly deep in thought. After a while, Matthew commented. You don't seem to be in a good mood. His words had jerked her back to her senses, but before she could reply, he continued. Let me switch on some music for you to relax. Okay. Elise agreed. Thus, he turned on the radio, which played a soft, light musical piece. This is my favorite song, he explained. It was written and composed by a famous composer named H. Upon hearing the familiar melody, she paused for a moment and inadvertently asked, Do you like her work a lot? Yes, her melodies are inspiring, and full of artistic conception, that resonates easily with the audience. It's just a pity she hasn't released any new songs recently. Elise nodded gently. They are pretty lovely melodies. It just so happens that I have an exclusive EP of hers at home. I'll give it to you another day. Later. Really? That's great. Who knew we had a common interest? Then, Matthew sighed. If only she could release new songs, that would be awesome. Then, I could take you to one of her concerts to support her. Inevitably, he was excited to gush over an idol of his, yet, Elise fell deep into thought again, and didn't speak up again. The atmosphere returned to normal just like that. It wasn't until the car pulled into the courtyard of the Griffith residence that she returned to her senses. By then, he was already opening the car door for her. We're home. Come on, then. As she hopped out of the car, she replied. Thank you. No problem. Matthew answered while smiling at her for the first time. That's what I should be doing, anyway. It happens to be my turn to send you to school tomorrow, so head to bed earlier, and I'll see you tomorrow. Okay. Elise answered. Good night. I'll see you tomorrow. After that, she returned to the room and locked the door before she started to remove her makeup. Her delicate, fresh face was revealed the moment all of the makeup was removed. As she looked at her reflection in the mirror, she pursed her lips and thought about Jonah's gift to her because it was truly too precious. If I actually leave the Griffith family one day, won't I be disappointing him? The fact was that she already arrived at a decision to momentarily keep the shares on his behalf, but fully return it to him once she left the family. After she made peace with her decision, Elise felt much lighter as she went to bed, and slept soundly until morning. The next day, she wore her makeup and dressed for school before she headed downstairs. Much to her surprise, there was no breakfast prepared at home this morning. It was right at this moment when Matthew entered with freshly bought breakfast. As the cook's busy today, she didn't have time to make breakfast. Since I happen to be heading out, I bought some food as well. See if it suits your appetite. With that, he placed the box he was carrying on the table. Upon opening it, Elise saw that it was filled to the brim with all sorts of exquisite breakfast dishes. It seemed he had bought an item from every available category at the breakfast cafe. As she perused the dishes, she yanked a large bear claw and told him, I'll just have this. Matthew happily passed a napkin to her whereby she sat down to start eating. Yet, even though he sat opposite her, he didn't move to take his share of the breakfast. Since she was feeling somewhat discomfited, Elise gobbled her food and wiped her mouth with the napkin before saying, We're running out of time. I have to leave now, or I'll be late. After he took his car keys, he let her out of the door as he answered, Don't worry, I won't let you be late. Just as he had promised, he sent her to school on time. The moment she arrived at the school campus, she realized that the atmosphere felt somewhat different today. As she headed to class, there were girls huddled together and seemingly deep in discussion. Before Elise could even reach the classroom, Michaela rushed over with exuberance and gushed. My husband is coming to our school this afternoon to film a music video, Elise. I'm so thrilled. Who's your husband? Elise asked dryly, causing Michaela to blush. Why, he's Jack Griffith. I'm his superfan. Suddenly, Elise understood why the school atmosphere was somewhat different. It was without a doubt because Jack was coming to her school to film a music video. Elise, come with me to watch my husband filming later in the afternoon. It'll be my first time seeing him up close and personal, and whenever I think about it, my heart races like mad. For some reason, Elise was tempted to respond that she had dinner at the same table as Jack last night, and was tired of seeing his face. However, as she saw how enamored her best friend was, she didn't have the heart to shatter her best friend's dreams and instead replied, "All right, I'll come with you to see your husband, if I have the time later." Looking so excited that she could leap at any given moment, Michaela squealed, "Thank you, Elise." Then, they headed toward the classroom, arm in arm. What they failed to notice was that Jasmine had trailed behind them all along, and upon seeing their interaction, she was green with jealousy. Due to the current state of her family affairs, her followers had disappeared one by one, whereas Elise and Michaela were merely growing closer to each other. It caused Jasmine to be furious. For what right did Elise have to be better than her everywhere she went? "You're an eyesore, Elise Sinclair." Jasmine's fists clenched in the silence. Since the public speaking competition during Chinese Week was around the corner, it would be a pity if anything were to happen to Elise. At this thought, the seeds of an evil idea began to sprout in Jasmine's mind. Today was the day that Elise discovered that Jack was indeed popular, since she could hear people discussing him, no matter where she went. He appeared at her school at exactly 3 in the afternoon. The places that he passed by were packed with people, especially the teacher's building where he was scheduled to film. Although the building was normally not in use, it was overcrowded today, and no matter how she squeezed through the crowd, Michaela failed to lead Elise there. "If I knew it was going to be so crowded, I would have arrived earlier. Now, I won't even be able to see a silhouette of him." Michaela felt somewhat vexed, for this was a rare opportunity to see her idol, yet she was unable to move through the crowd. As Elise stared at the throng of people before her, she couldn't help tugging at the hem of Michaela's shirt. "Are you sure we still want to head in?" Without any hesitation, Michaela nodded. "We must. How could we miss this rare opportunity to see my husband?" An unimpressed Elise stared at Michaela in the silence. Yet, Michaela was her only friend, so she had no choice but to bite the bullet and drag Michaela through the crowd. They finally reached the front row of the audience only to be notified that the shoot was closed to the public. And just like that, Michaela deflated like a burst balloon. "If I knew that, I wouldn't have squeezed here. Now, I still won't get the chance to see him." "It's okay," Elise comforted. "If you really want to see him, I still have another method." Instantly, Michaela's eyes widened. "What method? Quickly tell me. Have I told you before that I'm somewhat acquainted with him?" The moment Elise said that, Michaela's face lit up. "Really? Truly? You're not teasing me, are you? You and my husband know each other? That's great." Under Michaela's watchful gaze, Elise fished out her cell phone and gave Jack a call. Less than 5 minutes later, his assistant appeared to personally escort them to the set. "Please come this way with me, Miss Sinclair." The assistant then led them through a side entrance. Throughout their entire journey, Michaela was so excited that she nearly swooned and passed out when she finally saw Jack with her eyes. "Husband!" she cried, drawing the eyes of everyone on set. It was only after that when she realized what she had shouted, and quickly changed her greeting. Then, she skipped over to him and introduced Jack Griffith. "I'm your loyal fan, Michaela." Jack politely answered. "Nice to meet you." Then, he looked at Elise. "Do you need something from me?" "My friend is a fan of yours, and she wanted me to bring her to see you," Elise explained. "You're way more handsome than on television." Michaela gushed. She was blushing as she stared into Jack's glimmering eyes. Her response made Jack smirk devilishly. "Thank you. You're quite attractive yourself. We're about to begin filming, Jack. Quickly come over." As the deputy director had summoned Jack, he made his leave and returned to the set. Both Elise and Michaela had a first-hand experience of watching the entire filming process. Only a few short scenes needed to be filmed multiple times before they could wrap up the shoot and call it a day. Michaela couldn't help but sigh. "This is my first time seeing my husband hard at work. He's so handsome that I can burst into tears." At this moment, the deputy director rushed over, and he carefully regarded both Elise and Michaela before finally selecting Michaela. Then, he spoke. "We need a supporting actress for this particular scene. Why don't you give it a shot?" "Can I?" she cried out in surprise. In truth, it was Elise that the deputy director had taken note of from afar, since she had an alluring figure, and carried herself well. It was such a pity her face fell way short of the mark. Thus, he had to resort to his second choice, and rely on Michaela. Just give it a try. There are 2 or 3 scenes in total. The moment she heard that she could film with her idol, nothing else mattered. So, she quickly agreed before following the deputy director, to have her costume and makeup done. Elise had originally come to watch Jack film for Michaela's sake, and now that Michaela was off to film her scene, she decided to return to class. After bidding Michaela adieu, Elise made her move to head to the classroom. Yet, now that it was close to the end of the school day, Rita suddenly rushed up and said, "Michaela suffered an accident during the filming, Elise. Go and check on her." Upon hearing the news, Elise felt her heart drop. What? What kind of accident? There was a flicker in Rita's gaze, but she still answered. She fell and suffered a rather bad injury while shooting the scene. She's behind teaching Building 1. After hearing it, Elise was naturally anxious and immediately rushed off toward teaching Building 1. The moment she left, Rita went to look for Jasmine. "I did as you told me to. Elise is on her way there." Jasmine's eyes darkened. "Good job." As she said those words, she removed the bracelet on her wrist and shoved it into Rita's hand. What happens next will depend on you. Even though Rita closely stared at the bracelet, she still had her doubts. "Maybe we shouldn't do this, Jasmine. What if we slip up?" "Relax, I only wish to teach her a small lesson. Nothing bad will happen, and even if something did happen, I'll take the fall for it." "What are you afraid of?" Upon hearing Jasmine's response, Rita relaxed as she tucked the bracelet into her pocket, before she spun on her heel, and left in the direction Elise was headed for. Meanwhile, by the time Elise arrived at teaching Building 1, the film crew had already left. Since this building was normally not in use, it was deserted, now that the crew was no longer there. "Where are you, Michaela?" Even after she searched through the entire building, she failed to locate Michaela. By now, Elise started to feel like something was amiss, so she pulled out her cell phone to make a call. However, a second later, a dark shadow approached, and whacked the back of her head with a wooden club. As the pain overpowered her body, Elise's knees gave way and she collapsed to the ground. In her half-conscious state, Elise heard a woman saying, "Take her somewhere remote." So, she tried to keep her eyes open to see who it was, but her body became weighted, before she fell into an unconscious state. Now that Jasmine stood above her, she gave an evil smile. "Don't blame me for this, Elise. You asked for it." Matthew had been waiting at the school gates for Elise at the end of the school day. While she was at school, he even dug out H's limited edition album that he had previously buried, so that he could listen to it with Elise on the way home. Unfortunately, she failed to appear, even after he had waited for over an hour. Feeling somewhat surprised, he took his cell and gave her a ring, only to hear the cold, automated female voice responding. "Sorry, but the number you have dialed is temporarily unavailable." The moment he heard that, Matthew was somewhat irritated, but Danny happened to arrive at the school gates. Although they didn't have a good relationship at home, and were only cordial to each other without ever actually speaking, he knew Danny was in the same class as Elise. So, he took the initiative to strike up a conversation for the first time in ages. "Danny, have you seen Elise?" Because Danny had headphones on, he didn't hear Matthew's question. And so, he removed them and asked, "What did you say?" "Have you seen Elise?" Matthew repeated. "I've been waiting for her over an hour, but she still hasn't showed up." Danny didn't seem to find it strange. "Maybe she went home first. Or, maybe she's over at a friend's house. Why don't you give her a ring? Her phone is switched off." It was only then that Danny frowned. In all the time he had known Elise, she had never turned her phone off. "I'll help you to ask around." After he fished out his phone, he had asked a few good friends, before he obtained Michaela's number. However, she informed him that she was also looking for Elise. By now, he had also sensed that something was fishy. She couldn't have gotten into trouble, could she? However, Matthew's gaze only grew darker as there was only one possibility in his mind. Elise currently held 30% of the Griffith Group's shares in name, an amount that was enough to shake the entirety of Griffith Group. That possibly meant someone would have a reason to harm her. Let's look for her, before we start worrying. Yet, Danny was unable to heed Matthew's advice and only hurried to call Alexander. Elise might have gotten into trouble. Alexander, can you send someone to help us search for her? Even though Alexander was in a business meeting, he ended the meeting without any hesitation the moment he received the call from Danny. Then, Alexander asked, "What happened? Give me more details." So, then he related a sequence of events to Alexander while Alexander mobilized all of the forces that he could in that given moment. At the same time, he sent his men out and continued to speak to Danny. Alexander's men first checked the school's surveillance system to locate Elise's last known position. Then, they tracked her from there and finally narrowed the area where she could be. The car that took her out of school disappeared near Silver Moon Mountain. Alexander, could the vehicle have brought her there? With slightly darkened eyes, Alexander answered, "I'll head there with my men right now. No matter what, we must find her as soon as possible." Since Danny never expected him to be so invested in the matter, the man added hurriedly, "I'll go with you." The two brothers trekked into the mountains with a group of men. When Elise woke up again, she noticed that her surroundings were pitch black. She slowly sat up and realized that her hands were tied with ropes, so she couldn't move. "Is anyone there?" Elise shouted hoarsely to her surroundings, yet the only answer she got was her own echo. Roughly guessing the situation she was currently in, she struggled with all her might. Not even hesitating to jerk her wrists so violently that the ropes cut against them, she managed to break free in the end. Already adapted to the darkness, she looked around and found that it was a shabby hut. Then, she got up and walked to the door to open it. As the frosty wind of the dark night whistled by and froze her cheeks, accompanied by the howling of some wild animals coming from afar, Elise's heart sank. "When I find out who did this, I'll kill them." Suddenly, she saw two tall men coming toward her, so she hurriedly closed the door and retreated, feigning that she was still tied up. "It's tough to stay on this mountain even for a few days. It's okay. When we finish this, we can take a good rest for a while. Hold on a little longer, it's only 2 or 3 days more. It will soon pass." Elise listened to their conversation, which got louder as they got closer to the hut. Then, the door was opened, and as the harsh light hit Elise, she subconsciously stretched out her hand to shield. "You're awake." One of the men spoke, then threw a cold bun he brought in front of Elise. "Eat it, don't starve to death." Elise did not look at the bun on the ground, but raised her eyes to look at the two men and said, "Why did you kidnap me? Here?" The man did not answer her words but just said, "Don't ask what you shouldn't ask. We only did it for the money, so we don't know anything else." Elise lowered her eyes and said, "If you let me go now, I can give you a large sum of money." The two men laughed at the same time when they heard that. "Girl, do you think we're such untrustworthy people? You'd better stay here and shut it. Don't think that what little you have can help you. How about 1 million? Elise felt that once she said this, the two men would have an instant shift in attitude. They exchanged a look with each other and then said, "You're teasing us. 1 million? In rocks, right? No, real money. As long as you release me, I will leave you alone, and I will even give you 1 million in cash." The man who was head of the group was already interested, but looking at Elise's cunning look, he thought better of it. "Don't brag. You have 1 million? I'm not interested. Just stay here, and when the time is up, we will naturally let you go back." When Elise saw that this trick did not work, she thought of nothing more. Since the other party did not look like they wanted to hurt her, she decided to be patient and did not say anything more. About an hour later, the two people guarding her went to the door. "Hey, do you think what that girl said about the 1 million is true?" The other man chided. "What? How can you take a little girl's words seriously? Stop thinking nonsense, we should wait until the completion of all this." Okay, then I'll guard this place for the first half of the night, and then you come to replace me later. With that, one of them went to rest. As Elise listened to one set of footsteps walking away, her spirits lifted a little. If there was only one person watching her, then her chances of escaping were much better. For safety's sake, she still contacted Jamie first. She took off the bracelet she wore, and sent an SOS signal to Jamie. After sending it, she put the bracelet away, and only then she seriously surveyed the surroundings. Waiting until the man outside could not stay awake, and was feeling utterly sleepy, Elise found a thick wooden stick, and held it behind her. Then, she quietly slipped out of the wooden hut, found the man, and smashed him with the wooden stick ruthlessly. It was an unexpected move, so the man simply did not have time to react, and so he flopped to the ground directly. Without the slightest delay, Elise ran down the hill to escape. At the foot of the mountain, Alexander and Danny led their men in preparation to go up the mountain. On the way here, Alexander had studied the terrain of Silver Moon Mountain, and knew that there were only two roads that could reach the top of the mountain. One was the wider road that circled around the mountain, and the other was the smaller path at the back of the mountain. Denny, you go up along the wider road, and I'll go up along the trail. We will meet at the top of the mountain. If something unexpected happens in the middle of our journey, use the fire signal, as there is no communication signal in this mountain. Okay, Alex. Be careful. With that, the two of them launched into action, separately. The night in the mountains was extraordinarily cold, but while Elise shivered and shook, she never stopped running down the mountain. As she was too anxious to escape, she did not pay attention, and tripped over some rocks, causing her to lurch forward and fall down. Rolling along the steep road, she finally hit a large tree and stopped, luckily managing to avoid falling off the cliff. Gasping, Elise lay on the ground, looking at the bright moon overhead. Then, she was just about to get up, when she vaguely heard footsteps gradually approaching. As her heart thumped fast, she hurriedly held her breath, not daring to make any sound. Young Master Griffith, the night is cold. Put this jacket on. A subordinate handed over the jacket, but Alexander refused. I'm fine, and you guys should layer more on. How far do we have to go before we reach the top of the mountain? We have already done 2/3 of the journey, so there is still only a little way left. But the more we ascend up the mountain, the more difficult the road is, so we have to be careful. Got it. Tell everyone to pay attention to safety. Alexander had just finished speaking when someone suddenly rushed over. Young Master Griffith, there is a discovery ahead. Hearing this, Alexander took a big step forward and rushed over. Young Master Griffith, look, there's a shoe here. It looks like Miss Sinclair's. Hurriedly, Alexander picked the shoe up, and looked at it. It was indeed Elise's. Quick, check if there is anything else of note around. Young Master Griffith, look here. It seems that someone fell. Could it be Miss Sinclair? In a daze, Elise seemed to hear someone calling her name. She thought she had fallen, and was hallucinating until a tall figure appeared in front of her, and called out to her in a familiar tone. Elise? Only then did Elise open her eyes, and see Alexander's face. Alexander, why are you here? I'm not hallucinating, right? When Alexander saw that he had found Elise, the weight in his heart lifted, and he promptly helped Elise up from the ground. Are you okay? Elise subconsciously shook her head at Alexander. I'll help you up. Elise nodded, and she was just about to stand up when she stumbled, and her body lurched forward. At once, Alexander caught her and said, Are you all right? The two of them were so close that Elise could clearly hear his heartbeat. She hurriedly pushed him away and replied, Yes, it's just that my leg hurt a little from the fall, so I didn't manage to hold my balance just now. After hearing this, Alexander hesitated for a second, and then squatted down, and picked her up into his arms. What are you doing, Alexander? Let go of me. Elise struggled in embarrassment. If it weren't for the darkness, everyone could see her cheeks, that had become as red as tomatoes. Alexander frowned and asked, Didn't you say your leg hurts? Elise replied, But I can walk. It's not a problem for me. The road is slippery in the dark, so I don't want you to fall again. It's not a long way, anyway. Since Alexander said so, Elise had to swallow her words and obediently stayed in his arms. She let him carry her over to a boulder, where he squatted down to check her injuries. Luckily, they are just some superficial injuries. You'll be fine, after putting on a little medicine back home. Oh, thank you, Alexander. Alexander got up, and instructed the subordinates behind him, saying, "Contact Danny and tell him to rendezvous at the foot of the mountain." "Yes, young Master Griffith." Then Alexander looked at Elise and said, "I'll carry you down." He was not asking Elise's opinion but rather only informing her, but Elise hastily refused. "No need for that. I can walk by myself." However, Alexander did not give her a chance to refuse. Instead, he squatted down in front of her. Elise hesitated for a moment, before climbing on Alexander's back. Then, Alexander carried her down the mountain. It was the first time she was carried by a man like this, so a strange feeling surfaced in her heart, as if she was a deer caught in the headlights. "Elise, what are you thinking? Retract those thoughts of yours." Chiding herself in her heart, Elise allowed Alexander to carry her along the mountain path all the way to the bottom of the mountain. Soon, he safely brought her back to the Griffith residence, where Elise's accident had already alarmed Jonah. Fortunately, Elise had already been found, but the elderly man had been waiting in the hall all this time until Elise returned. "Ellie, you are back. How are you? Nothing serious, right?" Jonah asked with concern, as soon as he saw Elise. "Grandpa Griffith, I'm fine. All thanks to Alexander." Jonah's eyes darkened. "Who is it that's brave enough to mess with one of the Griffiths? Alex, you must find out for me. This matter will not be tolerated." "Yes, Grandpa. I will have someone look into it," Alexander said with a serious face. "Well, you have worked hard today, so go back to rest early," Jonah said and looked at Elise. "Ellie, sorry that you've been frightened by all this, but don't you worry. I will definitely get you justice." "Thank you, Grandpa Griffith." Initially, Elise did not want the Griffith family to interfere. "This is my own issue after all. But no matter who they are, I will not let them go. Never in a million years." After Elise returned to her room, and locked the door behind her, she contacted Jamie. "Boss, are you okay?" "Yes, do me a favor." Elise slowly typed out a few lines and sent them, then finally closed her computer. As she did so, the corners of her mouth raised up, accompanied by an aura of danger. The next day, Elise took time off, and did not go to school. Jasmine looked at the empty seat and couldn't help smirking in satisfaction. Without a doubt, her mood was much better now. Haha. I bet that woman is locked up in a hut on some mountain right now. When the Chinese Week's public speaking competition was over, she would get someone to release Elise. By then, the outcome would have been decided, and even with the best abilities, Elise could not change anything. However, Jasmine did not notice that in addition to Elise's absence from school, there was another person who also did not arrive. "Be honest with me, and I might be able to give you a chance." Rita was accosted, as soon as she left her house. She didn't expect to see Elise, the girl she didn't want to see the most, appearing right at this moment. Elise's voice was flat but dangerous, and for a moment, Rita was so surprised that she could not even say a word. Elise looked at her with a dark face. "What? Are you very surprised to see me?" Rita nodded, then shook her head. Finally, she dropped to her knees in front of Elise out of fear. "I'm sorry. I was wrong, and I should not have listened to Jasmine to do that to you." In the next few minutes, Rita immediately gave a complete account of all that had happened. Jasmine said that she only wanted to lock you up there and not harm you. She only wanted to teach you a lesson, and release you after 2 days. I was blinded by the money she offered and agreed. Please, let me go. We are classmates, after all. Rita's voice broke as she spoke in tears. If she had known that Elise was so capable, she would never have done the dirty work for Jasmine. I can let you go, but you have to do something for me. Rita looked as if she had found a life-saving chance and hastily asked. What is it? As long as you let me go, I will do anything. So, Elise leaned forward and whispered something in her ear. In the afternoon, Rita went to school as usual, and the first thing she did when she arrived at school was to return the bracelet Jasmine gave her. "Jasmine, this bracelet is too worthless. It's not worth my effort." Jasmine looked at the bracelet with some surprise, and raised her eyes to look at Rita coldly. "What's wrong? You think it's too cheap? This is the bracelet my father spent tens of thousands abroad to buy for me, and now it can be worth a lot of money, even in antique stores, right?" Without answering Jasmine's question, Rita coldly snorted. "I have done such a difficult task for you, but you only give such a little thing to me. Are you serious? I don't care, you have to give me more money. Otherwise, I will tell the whole world about what you did." Jasmine did not expect Rita to threaten her with this matter, so she silently clenched her fists. "Rita, I've never expected you to actually do this to me. You're so good at pretensions before. Oh, just say whether you'll give it to me or not. I want 100,000, and it must be given to me within today, or—" Rita was blunt enough, she just wanted money. If it were before, Jasmine would not care about such little money as 100,000, but now, her family had suffered a major change, and her father had given her much less pocket money. Therefore, she now relied on selling bags and jewelry to maintain her luxurious life. "Where can I get 100,000 for Rita? I don't have that much money." As expected, Rita didn't buy her excuse. "Who are you kidding? Everyone in the class knows that you have hundreds of thousands of pocket money a month. I just want 100,000, it's not too much. If you honestly do not want to give it to me, it doesn't matter. What's the big deal? I'll just go to the police to tell them everything, and I suppose you'll just end up in prison. You bitch." Jasmine was furious, but now that Rita was blackmailing her, she had no choice but to grit her teeth. "Okay, 100,000, right. I can give it to you, but how do you guarantee you won't come after me after taking this money? Bring me the money first. As for the future, I can't say for sure. It depends on my mood." Rita replied to Jasmine in a casual tone. "Rita, you'd better not go too far." For the first time, Jasmine felt that she had been blind before and honestly thought that Rita was a doormat in the past. But now she realized that Rita was actually a hungry wolf under a sheep's skin. "Have I? Then, do you want me to try harder?" "Jasmine, my patience is limited. You must give it to me today, or the consequences will be borne by yourself." With these words, Rita walked away, leaving Jasmine glaring after her, but there was nothing Jasmine could do. Where would she get the 100,000? Jasmine took her bag of jewelry to a pawn shop and barely managed to scrape together 50,000. However, she was still 50,000 short, and when she was at a loss, a man suddenly called out to her. "Girl, how about a loan?" "A loan?" Jasmine suddenly brightened up. "How do I do this? How much can I borrow at most?" The man smiled and said, "This will depend on your needs. No matter how much you require, we can solve your urgent needs." Thank God. The heavens have heard my plea, and sent me an angel in disguise. Jasmine followed the man to find out about borrowing money. When she returned to school, she threw the bag of cash containing 100,000 directly in front of Rita. "Here's 100,000 for you, don't come to me again." Rita was surprised to see that Jasmine had gotten 100,000 for her in such a short time, but she still accepted the bag. "Thanks. If you need my help again, feel free to look for me." Jasmine clenched her fists. She was very unwilling to give up the money, but she still maintained a smile on the surface. "Let me tell you that this is the last time. You'd better hope I don't have dirt on you in the future." With these words, Jasmine turned around and walked away. Rita held the bag of money, then put it away. Later, she took it to Elise and said, "This is what she gave me, Elise. I also did what you said, so can we just write it off between us?" Elise did not even look at the bag of money as she smiled coldly. "Don't worry. I am a woman of my word. I can let the grudge between us off, but from tomorrow onward, you should not go to school anymore." This 100,000 will be your travel expenses, and don't come back in the future. Hastily, Rita refused her suggestion. No, I can't take this money. I will ask my father to transfer me to another school, so don't worry. Elise sized her up, feeling that the girl in front of her still had some conscience, after all. However, things were no longer under Rita's control, according to Jasmine's nature. Although the money was given to Rita, she might do something to Rita in the near future. Jasmine is not someone who will give up easily. Take the money and just save yourself. With that, Elise felt that she had done her part in reminding Rita, and her conscience was clear. Next, it was time to settle accounts with Jasmine. For 2 days in a row, Elise did not go to school, and Jasmine did not notice anything wrong. She thought that Elise was still locked up in a dark room in the mountains, so she relaxed and prepared for the Chinese Week's public speaking competition. The Chinese Week's public speaking competition was crucial, as there would be many college professors hidden among the audience to spot good candidates for the next year's cohort of freshmen. Thus, it was no secret that this was why there were so many people who wanted to participate in this competition. The venue for the Chinese Week's public speaking competition was booked to be held in the city's largest gymnasium, gathering teachers and student representatives from all the city's famous high schools. Jasmine, don't be nervous when you go on stage later. Just perform as usual. The language teacher instructed in the background. This feeling of being valued by the teacher was very much appreciated by Jasmine, who said, "Don't worry. I will work hard, and I will definitely strive to get a good grade." The language teacher gave her a slight pat on the shoulder. "Good. Good luck then. I look forward to your performance." Jasmine smiled proudly, and looked toward the spotlight in the middle of the stage, where she was going to stand in just a moment, to enjoy the attention of everyone present. In fact, she seemed to have imagined the scene, where she was holding the gold trophy. Elise is also going to participate in the competition, but she hasn't come over yet, so you sit here, while I'll go outside to take a look. When the teacher mentioned Elise, at once, the expression on Jasmine's face suddenly changed. Fortunately, she hid it well, and in a flash, all the emotions on her face disappeared. She may already be outside. You go ahead. I'll be fine on my own. Okay. Then I'll go over first. Relax. As Jasmine looked at the teacher's back, her gaze deepened. Will Elise even be able to come to the competition? It all depends on her luck. In fact, Elise is probably still shivering in the cold. Then, Jasmine faintly withdrew her gaze, and looked at herself in the mirror. She had always been proud of her looks. Even though she was not the best-looking girl, she was far more beautiful than the ugly Elise. Jasmine was slated to be in the middle of the order, so it took a while before it was her turn. As soon as she got on stage, she looked at the audience down the stage. Smiling, she held the microphone close to her and began fluently. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jasmine. The eyes of the audience were collectively gathered on the stage, while even the judges were all nodding approvingly. At this moment, Jasmine's heart surged with satisfaction. However, at this moment at the entrance, Elise and Michaela walked in, and took their seats directly in the front row. Elise looked at Jasmine on the stage coldly and indifferently, as if she was looking at a clown. The moment Jasmine saw Elise, her face suddenly changed, and her speech became a bit slurred. Soon, she stopped speaking. The audience below glanced at each other, and could not help but ask, "What is going on? Why isn't she saying anything? It can't be that she forgot the words because she's nervous, right? Her performance was not bad. I thought she would be better. It's a pity. Her earlier performance was quite good." As the crowd gossiped among themselves, Elise looked at Jasmine on the stage with a smile. As for Jasmine, she simply opened her mouth, but her mind was blank, and no words came out. She tried hard to restrain her emotions and continue her speech, but now her mind was in turmoil, and she stuttered. Finally, once she wrapped up her speech, she hurriedly ran down from the stage. "I thought she would be so bold, but she's just a wimp." Michaela couldn't help but spit. Elise, however, pulled her. "Let's go. We'll go and meet her." So, Elise and Michaela went backstage together. At this moment backstage, Jasmine had come back to her senses, but her own performance was really terrible, and she got the lowest score so far. Feeling dejected, she sat on the stool with her face stiff, but her mind was not on the public speaking competition. Instead, she was wondering how Elise appeared at the competition.
Like, follow, subscribe.